Hey, I'm Kev Kiermastiker, and it's been a very long off-season for the IndyCar Series. Just over 5 months ago, in the middle of October, was last season's finale on the Club Speedway in Fontana, California. But after a very shortened pre-season testing schedule which concluded at Barber Motorsports Park last weekend, the series is now gearing up and looking forward to the streets of St. Petersburg, Florida, for the season opener this weekend. But while they're looking forward to the sun and shine in Florida, I would think it's well worth looking back and exciting and thrilling and entertaining last season. So this is my 2013 IndyCar Series season review. So the 2013 IndyCar Series had 19 races but 16 race weekends with double headers on the streets of Detroit, Toronto and Houston. And the pre-season favourites, kind of the usual suspects, who of course had at Penske Will Power, the bridesmaid, again in 2012, looking to finally get his first title in 2013. But also his teammate Harry Neves was looking for his first IndyCar title despite multiple Indy 500 wins. And then you had what would be presumed their main rivals for 2013, Target Chip Ganassi Racing, with reigning Indy 500 champ Dario Franchitti and his cool, calm, collected Kiwi teammate Scott Dixon, who had won a couple of titles and an Indy 500 in 2008 but was always a contender. And then you had the reigning champs Andretti Autosport with reigning champion Ryan Hunter-Reay, but things were also kind of expected of his teammate James Hinchcliffe, the mayor of Hinchtown, who had had a couple of promising showings in 2012. Then you had the dark horses such as maybe Tony Kanaan at KV Racing, who had won the title with Andretti in 2004 but never won an Indy 500. And then maybe Simon Pagenaud, who has a rookie finished 5th in the standings in 2012 with Sam Smith, Hamilton, Peterson, Motorsports, and look to continue that momentum towards the top. And then maybe even Takuma Sato with AJ Foyt, because who doesn't love Sato? But the season opened at what is now kind of the traditional season open on the streets of St. Petersburg with the Honda Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. And Will Power led the early portion of the race from pole, and he was a contender until he got taken out under the safety car by a Flying Panther car belonging to J.R. Hildebrand. And so Hildebrand's teammate Oriol Silva also led some parts of the race in the middle of the race, while safety cars and strategy started to come into play. But Helio Castroneves led most of the race with 42 laps in the other Penske, but for the final 26 laps it was James Hinchcliffe in his Andretti Autosport machine who led the way to the checkered flag and won his maiden IndyCar race. Quite an emotional victory as well in Dan Wheldon's hometown, and Wheldon was meant to be driving that 27 Andretti Autosport car in 2012 until he unfortunately had that fatal accident at Las Vegas in the season finale of 2011. And so Hinchcliffe got his maiden victory ahead of Helio Castroneves, and Hinchcliffe's teammate Marco Andretti had a quite mature drive to finish 3rd. Tony Kanaan was 4th. Scott Dixon just outdragged Simona Di Silvestro to the line to claim 5th ahead of the Swiss Miss in her KV Racing debut. EJ Visa was just a couple of inches behind Di Silvestro at the line in 7th, as it was 3 wide over the finish line. Takuma Sato was 8th, Justin Wilson was 9th in his Delcoin machine, and Alex Tagliani in the Brian Herter Autosport Barracuda Racing car was 10th. Round 2 of the championship took place at one of the few road courses on the calendar, the Barber Motorsports Park in Alabama, and on pole was Ryan Hunter-Reay, the reigning champ in his Andretti Autosport machine, with Will Power of Penske alongside him. And it was Hunter-Reay who led the early portion of the race, and despite Will Power and Charlie Kimball having a great race in his Chip Ganassi car leading a few laps, it was Helio Castroneves who emerged as his main challenger, and with relatively few cautions, just one in the early part of the race, which involved the St. Pete winner James Hinchcliffe, It was mainly a strategy race, with it proving quite hard to pass around this quite tight circuit here in Alabama, and it was Castroneves who was leading until 15 laps from the end, when Hunter-Reay regained the lead and took his first win of the season ahead of Scott Dixon, Helio Castroneves, Charlie Kimball in a great fourth, and Will Power in fifth on a different strategy to the guys in front of him. Simon Pagenaud was sixth for Sam Smith, Hamilton, Peterson, Motorsports. And then you had Marco Andretti, Justin Wilson for Dale Coyne, Joseph Newgarden, and a great night for Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing, and Tristan Vautier, the French rookie and Pagenaud's teammate at Smith, Peterson, Hamilton, Motorsports, who got 10th. And going away from Barber, it was Helio Castroneves who led the championship by 9 points from Scott Dixon. 13 points back was Ryan Hunter-Reay, 18 points back was Marco Andretti, and 23 points back was James Hinchcliffe after his early bath. So the series headed to the California sun for round 3 and the Toyota Grand Prix of Long Beach. And in the early going, it was pole sitter Dario Franchitti leading the way, with Ryan Hunter-Reay and Will Power keeping him company. But on lap 31, Takuma Sato for AJ Foyt would take the lead and wouldn't relinquish it for the rest of the way, as he claimed his maiden IndyCar Series win, and the first win for AJ Foyt since the early thousands and the days of Ayrton Dare. Takuma Sato would beat out Graham Rahal in his Rahal Letterman Logan racing machine for the win, with Justin Wilson in third. Dario Franchitti slipped down to fourth, and JR Hildebrand with a very nice fifth in his Panther machine. And Oyo Serbia, his kind of Panther teammate, claimed sixth in his Panther dry and Reinbold racing car. Marco Andretti continued his good start to the season with 7th. Simon Pagenaud was 8th. Simone Di Silvestro was 9th. And Helio Castroneves was down in 10th for Penske, with Will Power down in 16th and Ryan Hunter-Reay crashing out on that 49. And so Castroneves led the championship, leaving Long Beach by just 6 points from Sato and just 10 points from Dixon. Andretti was 4th with 12 points back, and Justin Wilson was 5th, 18 points back, with Ryan Hunter-Reay, the reigning champ, in 6th. For round 4, the series headed down south for the only visit to Brazil in the championship, and the Itaiparva, I do apologise for saying it wrong, Sao Paulo Indy 300. And on pole once again was Ryan Hunter-Reay, and he led the first few laps until Tony Kanaan took the lead on lap 10 in front of his home fans. You probably hear the cheering all over Brazil if everyone knew it was on. And then you saw the likes of Sebastian Bourdais, Takuma Sato, Marco Andretti, Hunter-Reay again, and JR Hildebrand in his Panther take turns leading the race. But it was an action-packed race with 7 cautions and an average green flag run of only 7 laps, with a quarter of the race run under caution. And so it was the longest green flag run which was left till last, from lap 59 till the end on lap 75. And who was in the lead? It was Takuma Sato, but he was defending hard in those last few laps from the likes of Joseph Newgarden and in the end James Hinchcliffe. And on the penultimate lap, he denied the Canadian the lead, but only just. But on the last lap, Hinchcliffe managed to make the Japanese driver outmaneuver himself into the last corner. Sato outbraked himself. Hinchcliffe got the cutback, he got the run towards the line and grabbed his second IndyCar victory of the season ahead of Sato. Marco Andretti in third, Oyo Serbia in fourth, and the aforementioned Joseph Newgarden in fifth for Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing. In sixth was EJ so having a great run in his kind of South American home round, with Dario Franchitti 7th, Simone Di Silvestro in a great 8th for KV, Simon Pagenaud in 9th, and Charlie Kimball rounded out the top 10. And so going away from Brazil and heading towards the big one in the next round, it was Takuma Sato leading the championship by 13 points from the consistent Marco Andretti. 20 points back was Helio Castroneves, who had a disappointing round in front of his home fans. Then you had a few points behind him, James Hinchcliffe, the winner, clawing himself back into the top 5, with Scott Dixon rounding out the top 5, 35 points back from Sato, with the reigning champ Ryan Hunter-Reay in 6th. So the series headed to Indianapolis for the big one, the Indy 500 for round 5. And the front row was a very interesting mix and cast of characters, with Ed Carpenter, one of the few oval specialists in the series, on pole with his Ed Carpenter racing machine. He was ahead of Carlos Munoz, the rookie for Andretti Autosport, with his teammate Marco Andretti filling out the front row. And then the early part was kind of an Andretti affair. You had Marco Andretti, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Munoz, of course, up there. You had KV Racing with Tony Kanaan and Ed Carpenter as well. And there weren't many cautions to spread out the field. Only 10% of the race was under caution, and so it was quite a frenetic race for virtually the whole 500 miles, with few caution periods bringing the likes of James Jakes to the front in his Ray Hall-Lanigan racing machine. You also saw James Hinchcliffe for Andretti get strong towards the end of the race, and unfortunately for Ed Carpenter, he spun near the end of the race after leading 37 laps. And so as they prepared for the final restart on lap 197 going on to lap 198, he had Ryan Hunter-Reay leading Tony Kanaan and Carlos Munoz. And Tony Kanaan got the jump on Ryan Hunter-Reay at the restart, with Munoz getting the jump on Ryan Hunter-Reay as well. And then the caution came out as Dario Franchitti in turn 1 crashed, where Takuma Sato crashed as well, trying to pass him for the Indianapolis win in 2012. But for 2013, we saw a new face on the Borg Warner Trophy, and a face that had wanted to be on there for an extremely long time in Tony Kanaan, getting his first Indy 500 win, ahead of Carlos Munoz, the rookie Colombian for Andretti Autosport, who is running in Indy Lights for them, but stepping up to the big time for 2014. And then you had the reigning champ Ryan Hunter-Reay sat in for third, ahead of his teammate Marco Andretti, with Justin Wilson and a brilliant fifth for Dale Coyne. Helio Castroneves was being quite reliable this season and finished in 6th, ahead of Penske's main threat for most of the race, AJ Allmendinger, the NASCAR driver now, who'd previously driven in Champ Car in the mid-thousands. Then you had Simon Pagenaud in 8th, Charlie Kimball in 9th, and Ed Carpenter recovered up to 10th. So going away from the Indianapolis 500, it was Marco Andretti leading 11 points ahead of Takuma Sato, with Helio Castroneves in third with 16 points back. Ryan Hunter-Reay was in a good position in 4th, 30 points back, with his teammate James Hinchcliffe in 5th, 40 points back, with Justin Wilson just outside the top 5. After a fantastic Indy 500, the championship headed to Detroit for the first of the doubleheader rounds for the Chevrolet Indy Duel in Detroit. And in race 1 on pole was the surprise EJ Viso for Andretti Autosport, and alongside him was Mike Conway in one of his few outings for Dale Coyne Racing. And it was Conway who would lead most of the way and would lead most of the laps of the race, 47 of them in total, with Ryan Hunter-Reay leading 20 and his teammate Justin Wilson only leading 3 in the other Dale Coyne car. And it was Conway who would win in a race which only had 3 cautions, and for the second part of the race was green flag, while the first part was kind of interrupted by those cautions. In second was Ryan Hunter-Reay, and Justin Wilson on third completed a fabulous day for Dale Coyne, with Scott Dixon 4th and Helio Castroneves back up there again in 5th. Dario Franchitti was 6th, Joseph Newgarden and a brilliant 7th for Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing, and Will Power in 8th, Graham Rahal in 9th, and behind him was his teammate at Rahal Edmund Lanigan, James Jakes. So the second duel in Detroit was a bit more of a complicated affair. On pole you had the victor of the first duel, Mike Conway, with his fellow Englishman James Jakes alongside him. But it was the Aussie Will Power in third, who got a super start and led the opening few laps before Conway took the lead. But this was a race littered with caution, with 6 caution periods in the end, covering almost a third of the race under caution. And you saw the likes of Tony Kanaan, Tristan Volche, Charlie Kimball, Simon Pagenaud and James Jakes leading because of this kind of strategy being thrown out of the window because of these cautions. And it was Jakes leading on lap 58 when he couldn't resist the charging Simon Pagenaud in his Smith Peterson Hamilton's Motorsports machine, getting past, taking the lead and leading the rest of the way to claim his maiden IndyCar victory. Behind him was Jakes holding off a charging Mike Conway, and Jakes got his best IndyCar result to date, with second ahead of Conway, who filled out the podium and had another brilliant result in a brilliant weekend for Dale Coyne. Scott Dixon was fourth ahead of his teammate Dario Franchitti. In sixth was Marco Andretti. Charlie Kimball was seventh. Helio Castroneves again in the top 10 in eighth, with Graham Rahal ninth, and getting a rare top 10 this season, Sebastian Saavedra for Dragon Racing. And so after a crazy weekend of racing and cautions and results, it was a tie at the top. Helio Castroneves and Marco Andretti shared the lead, with Ryan Hunter-Reay 15 points back, Scott Dixon 20 points back, and Simon Pagenaud now in the top 5, just 29 points off the lead. So round 8 of the championship took place on the Texas Motor Speedway for the Firestone 550. On pole was Will Power in his Penske, but it was Marco Andretti who led the early laps and got a better getaway. He also had Ryan Hunter-Reay keeping in company, who led quite a few laps as well, with Power leading only 4 laps in the end of this race. But it's Helio Castroneves, his teammate, who led 132 laps from lap 97 till the end to gain his first win of the season, ahead of Ryan Hunter-Reay in second, Tony Kanaan in third, Ed Carpenter in a great fourth, and Marco Andretti rounding out the top 5. Dario Franchitti had a rare good race this season in sixth, Will Power in seventh, Joseph Newgarden for Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing in eighth, James Hinchcliffe in ninth, and EJ Viso in the other Andretti car in 10th. And so leading away from Texas was Helio Castroneves by 22 points from Marco Andretti, who was just 5 points ahead of his teammate Ryan Hunter-Reay. Tony Kanaan was fourth, 64 points back now, just a point ahead of Takuma Sato and Simon Pagenaud in fifth. For round 9, IndyCar went to one of its traditional tracks. It went to the Mile, it went to the Milwaukee IndyFest, and on pole was Marco Andretti for Andretti Autosports, with his teammate James Hinchcliffe alongside him. And Andretti would lead the opening part of the race, 61 laps, until unfortunately he hit trouble. But you saw his teammate Ryan Hunter-Reay lead the race, and Will Power, EJ Viso, Justin Wilson, but it was Takuma Sato who led the most laps with 109. But on lap 198 it was Ryan Hunter-Reay who took the lead and took the victory in the end for his second win of the season. And in second was Helio Castroneves, despite some advances from his teammate Will Power in the closing laps. EJ Viso was fourth, and Hinchcliffe rounded out the top 5. Dixon was sixth, and in the end Sato finished seventh. Dario Franchitti was eighth, Justin Wilson was ninth, and Tony Kanaan rounded out the top 10. And in the championship it kind of opened itself up a bit now, with Helio Castroneves leading Ryan Hunter-Reay by 16 points. Marco Andretti was third, 50 points back, with Sato in fourth and Dixon in fifth, just a few points behind Sato, but 78 points behind Castroneves. So the series headed to Iowa Speedway for round 10 of the championship, the halfway mark, with the Iowa Corn Indy 250. Once again Will Power got pole in his Penske, and the Iowa heat race is a bit different from the traditional oval qualifying format. But once again at the start he was beaten away by another pesky Andretti Autosport machine, this time in the form of James Hinchcliffe, who had gone to the 226 of the 250 laps for a dominant third victory of the season. There was also Justin Wilson, Ed Carpenter, and for that Graham Rahal and his Rahal Letterman Lanigan race machine leading, but it was mainly a Mayor of Hinchtown production. And so Hinchcliffe beat his teammate Ryan Hunter-Reay to the victory, with Tony Kanaan in third, Ed Carpenter in fourth, and Graham Rahal rounding out the top 5. Simon Pagenaud was sixth, Oyo Serbia 7th, Helio Castroneves down in 8th, ahead of Marco Andretti and EJ Viso in the remaining Andretti Autosport machine, rounding out the top 10. And so the championship headed away from Iowa, was Helio Castroneves leading by just 9 points from the reigning champ Ryan Hunter-Reay. In third, 55 points back, was Marco Andretti, with James Hinchcliffe up to fourth, 66 points back, with Tony Kanaan in fifth, 79 points behind. In sixth was Simon Pagenaud, 91 points back, just a point ahead of Scott Dixon, who was seventh. Round 11 of the championship was a turning point, and returning destination to the American Open World calendar after 23 years away. IndyCar returned to the Pocono Raceway for the Pocono IndyCar 400. And on par was Marco Andretti, and once again he led the early part of the race, but once again his pace wasn't rewarded with victory. And so it was the likes of Charlie Kimball, Will Power and Scott Dixon who were fighting for the victory, along with Tony Kanaan, but unfortunately the Brazilian fell out of contention when he clipped the rear bumper of Scott Dixon when challenging for the lead and damaged his front wing. And so for the last 28 laps it was Scott Dixon in the lead to claim his first victory of the season in the end, ahead of his teammate Charlie Kimball, with Dario Franchitti rounding out the podium and top three for Chip Ganassi Racing. In fourth was Will Power, and in fifth was Joseph Newgarden with a brilliant result for Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing. Simon Pagenaud was sixth, with Justin Wilson seventh, Harry Cashineves once again in the top 10 in eighth, Ed Carpenter in ninth, and unfortunate Marco Andretti with fuel problems having to really save towards the end in 10th. And so what did this mean for the championship? Well, it meant Cashineves led Ryan Hunter-Reay by 23 points, with Marco Andretti 55 points back in third. Scott Dixon was up to fourth, with James Hinchcliffe in fifth, just a point ahead of Tony Kanaan, but 84 points back from Cashineves. And the series went to Canada for its only visit up north to Toronto for the Honda Indy Toronto, and it was the second doubleheader of the season. So in race one it was Dario Franchitti on pole for Chip Ganassi, with Sebastian Bourdais in his Dragon Racing car alongside him. And it was Franchitti who led the first 20 laps of the race until Bourdais got past, and he led until the first round of stops. And then it was Will Power leading the middle part of the race. He led 29 laps, and it looked like he might be on his way to victory, but in the end he ended his race in the baggers. And so for the last part of the race it was a duel between Sebastian Bourdais and Scott Dixon, and on lap 78 Dixon grabbed the lead and went relinquish it to grab his second consecutive win. And Bourdais got second and Franchitti got third, with Marco Andretti fourth, Tony Kanaan in fifth, Harry Cashineves being ever consistent in sixth, with Mike Conway for Dale Coyne in seventh. Hinchcliffe in front of his home fans was 8th, with Simon Pagenaud in 9th and Simona Di Silvestro rounding out the top 10. And the second race from Toronto was a bit of a simpler affair. From pole, Scott Dixon led 81 of the 85 laps on show to claim an amazing third win on the trot and win both races in the doubleheader in Toronto for a nice bonus. Harry Cashineves led a couple of laps along with his teammate Will Power, and he finished second in the end to his now main championship rival. Sebastian Bourdais completed a brilliant weekend for Dragon Racing, with third ahead of Dario Franchitti and EJ Viso in fifth. Charlie Kimball came sixth in the third Chip Ganassi machine, with Mike Conway a consistent seventh ahead of his teammate Justin Wilson. Marco Andretti was ninth, with Ax Tekulani on home turf in 10th for Brian Herter. And so going away from Toronto, Harry Cashineves was now 29 points ahead of the hot Scott Dixon. 69 points back was Ryan Hunter-Reay after a disappointing weekend, just a point ahead of Marco Andretti, with Simon Pagenaud in fifth, 116 points back. For round 14, the series visited the classic Mid-Ohio sports car course for the Honda Indy 200 at Mid-Ohio. On pole was Ryan Hunter-Reay with Will Power alongside him, and it was Hunter-Reay who led the opening 30 laps of the race. But for the remaining 60 laps of the race, it was a duel between Charlie Kimball and Simon Pagenaud for the race victory. And on that 73, Kimball prevailed, passing Pagenaud and leading for the rest of the race to claim his maiden IndyCar victory. Behind Pagenaud was Dario Franchitti in third, Will Power in fourth, and Ryan Hunter-Reay rounding out the top five. In sixth was Harry Cashineves, but most importantly ahead of his championship rival Scott Dixon in seventh. Justin Wilson was eighth, Marco Andretti was ninth ahead of his teammate James Hinchcliffe. And so for the championship, this meant that Cashineves halted his slide against Scott Dixon and now led the Kiwi by 31 points. Ryan Hunter-Reay was third, 65 points back, with Marco Andretti 76 points back in fourth. Rounding out the top 5 was Simon Pagenaud, but he was 103 points now behind the Penske man on top. Round 15 of the championship took place on the last road course visit with the GoPro Indy Grand Prix of Sonoma on the Sonoma Raceway in California. On what proved to be his last pole position in IndyCar, Dario Franchitti led the way for the first part of the race, with Ryan Hunter-Reay again giving him some issues. And then it turned into a Scott Dixon, Tony Kanaan and James Hinchcliffe power struggle in the middle of the race before Scott Dixon turned out on top. But pitting for the penultimate caution, or under the penultimate caution, was Scott Dixon and Will Power, with Power's pit stop in front of Dixon's. And so when Dixon left his pit box, he accidentally clipped one of Power's crewmen and then suffered a penalty, and so he dropped down the order once the racing began. And so in the end, Will Power won ahead of Justin Wilson and Dario Franchitti in third, with Marco Andretti fourth and Simon Pagenaud in a good fifth. Ryan Hunter-Reay was sixth, with Helio Castroneves again in the top 10 in seventh, with James Hinchcliffe eighth, Simone Di Silvestro ninth and Sebastian Bourdais in 10th. But leaving Sonoma, it was Helio Castroneves leading the championship by 39 points from Scott Dixon, with Ryan Hunter-Reay now 62 points back, Marco Andretti 70 points back, and Simon Pagenaud just under the 100 mark now behind on 99 back. And for round 16 of the championship, the series visited the streets of Baltimore for the Grand Prix of Baltimore. On pole was Scott Dixon, but alongside him was Penske's Will Power, the teammate of his championship rival Helio Castroneves. And it was Power who led the opening 31 laps of the race before chaos ensued in the middle part of the race. In the end, there were 6 cautions and the race ran under the yellow for a third of its distance. And after the likes of Sebastian Bourdais, Tristan Volcher and Graham Rahal led the race, on the final restart on lap 66, it was Marco Andretti who had found himself in the lead. But he was on worn tyres and he couldn't hold off a charging Simon Pagenaud with 6 laps to go, as the Frenchman got past and led for the rest of the race to claim his second victory of the season, despite the advances of his fellow Frenchman Sebastian Bourdais on occasion. In the end, though, it was Joseph Newgarden who claimed second place for a career IndyCar best finish for Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing. Sebastian Bourdais was third for Dragon Racing, with Justin Wilson in fourth, and rounding out the top 5 was Simona Di Silvestro for KV Racing. In 6th was Charlie Kimball, 7th James Hinchcliffe, and in 8th, to show how crazy this race was Sebastian Saveja in the other Dragon Racing car. Helio Castroneves was 9th, with Marco Andretti in 10th, but importantly for Castroneves, he was ahead of his title rival Scott Dixon, who on a restart got taken out by Will Power, who was trying to overtake someone as the green flag flew. And so for the championship, this meant that it was Castroneves ahead of Dixon by 49 points now, with Simon Pagenaud up to third, 70 points back. Maybe a bit too late for a late season title charge though. He was just a point ahead of Marco Andretti, with Ryan Hunter-Reay just 4 points behind Pagenaud in 5th. And so IndyCar headed to a new venue, a venue that had been on the Champ Car and Kart schedules previously. The Reliant Park Street Car Park course, which was the car park for Reliant Stadium, which is the home of the Houston Texans in the NFL. And so the Shell Pennzoil Grand Prix of Houston was the last doubleheader on the schedule, and on pole was a very surprising face in the first race. It was Takuma Sato for AJ Foyt after having a very quiet season after a great start to it. And so he led away for the first 3 laps, but unfortunately his car ran into problems very early on, so Will Power took the lead. And for the rest of the race, it was a struggle between Will Power and Scott Dixon to lead the race, but Dixon took the lead on lap 73 and led for the rest of the way after leading 44 laps in the race to claim a very important victory, as his main championship rival Power's teammate Helio Castroneves ran into problems with his car. Simona Di Silvestro was second in a brilliant race for her for KV Racing and her only podium in IndyCar to date. Justin Wilson was third, Simon Pagenaud fourth, and Joseph Newgarden in fifth for Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing, and definitely a race for the lower guys. James Jakes was sixth, Graham Rahal was 7th behind his teammate Sebastian Bourdais 8th, EJ Viso 9th, and Luca Filippi in the Brian Herter Autosport machine was in 10th. And so the second race from Houston was a critical one for the championship. Harry Cashineves led away from pole for the first 10 laps until his car ran into problems. Scott Dixon, his main title rival, inherited the lead for the next 29 laps until Cashineves' teammate Will Power took the lead on lap 40 and wouldn't relinquish it for the next 51 laps to take the victory for Penske. However, Scott Dixon was second for Chip Ganassi and James Hinchcliffe was third. Justin Wilson was fourth and Sebastian Bourdais completed a great weekend again for Dragon Racing in fifth. Simon Pagenaud was sixth, but unfortunately that wasn't enough to keep his title hopes alive. Oyo Serbia was 7th, Charlie Kimball 8th, Mike Conway 9th for Delcoin, and Simona Di Silvestro in the top 10 again for KV Racing. And so going away from Houston, heading towards the season finale at the Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, California. It was a new leader in the championship. It was Scott Dixon, leader by 25 points from Helio Castroneves. Pagenaud was in a safe third, 55 points back, with Justin Wilson in fourth, 86 points back, but just 3 points ahead of Marco Andretti in fifth. However, that second race at Houston was overshadowed by a horrendous crash near the end of the race. Dario Franchitti went over the back of Takuma Sato, and EJ Viso was also involved, and so he went into the catch fencing. However, the DW12 held up and protected him from maybe even fatal injuries, but he did suffer injuries to his ankle and back. He also suffered a third concussion, and so on doctor's advice he retired at the end of the season. And so it was the end of a glorious career for the Scot after 4 IndyCar titles and 3 Indy 500 victories. However, he's staying in IndyCar with Chip Ganassi, and he will be driving the pace car at this year's Indy 500. And so we may be not seeing the last of the Scot, at least in the IndyCar paddock at least. So the final race of the 2013 IndyCar Series season, the 19th race at the Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, California. It was the MAV-TV 500, the final part of the Triple Crown in the IndyCar Series, which involved the Indianapolis 500 and the Pocono, now 500 but 400 last year. And so going into the race, the 25-point gap, with the way the IndyCar point system works, with 50 points for win and bonus points for leading a lap, for leading the most laps, and for pole, Cashineves basically had to be in the top 5 and hope Dixon ran into trouble if he was going to do with the least requirements to win the title. On the other hand, for Dixon, the top 10 finish would probably be significant enough for him to win the title. Provided Cashineves didn't win the race, then he would probably have to be in the top 7. And so with qualifying, it was really vital to the race, and it was strike 1 to Penske, with Will Power once again getting a pole on an oval. Could he finally convert it into a win though? And Cashineves was right up there as well, while the Ganassis were down the order, with Alex Tagliani in place of the injured Dario Franchitti right there near the back. And so for the first 100 laps of the race, we saw the Ganassis struggling to make their way through the field, while the Penske's charged at the front along with a host of other drivers. It was very frenetic in these first 100 laps, with the likes of Carlos Munoz and the other Andretti Autosport car making another appearance for them, really charging to the front, using the low line while everyone was on the high line. Unfortunately for Munoz, this would prove his undoing as he crashed on lap 100, trying to really nail it down the bottom there. But you also saw the likes of Ryan Hunter-Reay, Marco Andretti, Tony Kanaan, Ed Carpenter right up there at the front. And after a huge crash on 100 on lap 110, which involved Justin Wilson, Tristan Voltaire, Joseph Newgarden, and Simona Di Silvestro, really kind of halted the race for 15 laps. That second half of the race was totally different. It was about survival, especially for the Honda drivers, as debris and muck filled the radiators, and they were basically just conserving the engine really to the finish, most of these Honda drivers. In the end, only one Honda driver managed to do that, Scott Dixon, who would prove to become the champion as well, as he finished in 5th place in the end. But in that second half of the race, you also saw some great battles near the front, especially involving Dixon's teammate Alex Tagliani, really taking advantage of having a top car for once in the series, and he really showed his worth until he unfortunately crashed out. You also saw Sebastian Bourdais, the Dragon Racing car, challenge all race long near the front until he crashed as well. But in the end, it was what Will Power would call his most satisfying win to date, as he took his second overall victory in the IndyCar Series, but I guess his first proper one after winning the random lottery grid race of Texas in 2011, the second one at least. Ed Carpenter finished second in his Ed Carpenter racing machine, not quite replicating his victory here in 2012, but a very solid finish to the year for Ed. Tony Kanaan was third for KV Racing, showing a nice resurgence in the second half of the year for KV after being a bit lost in the middle part of the year. James Hinchcliffe also finished in a high in fourth, with the champion in fifth. Helio Castroneves finished sixth for lap down after a wrong pit lane call by the captain as well near the end of the race cost him a penalty as well. He had Marco Andretti in 7th and Simona Di Silvestro running at the end in 8th in the other KV Racing car. Ryan Hunter-Reay was 9th and Charlie Kimball was 10th after leading near the end of the race and fighting along with J.R. Hildebrand for the victory, and Hildebrand in the Brian Herter Autosport car in the season finale. And in the end, in the championship, it would prove to be Scott Dixon from Helio Castroneves. And what an epic end to the season it was, after a fantastic season throughout with many thrills and spills, and you could never guess what was going to happen in the next race. And if you did guess, it probably wouldn't have happened. It probably would have been something totally opposite to what would have happened. That was IndyCar 2013. And if I had to describe the IndyCar Series in 2013 in 3 words or less, it would probably have to be any given Sunday. There are 10 different winners, not the most in series history, but the second most. And then there were 4 different first-time winners in the form of Takuma Sato, Charlie Kimball, Simon Pagenaud and James Hinchcliffe. And in the end, he actually had Helio Castroneves leading the championship the most though. He was just cruising on his lot in the middle of the ocean, just relaxing on the waves. But that lack of bite to get top 5 and podium places instead of just setting for top 10s maybe cost him in the end, as in the second half of the season you had that charging ball in a China shop Scott Dixon on a powerboat, just going over those rays, going next to Castroneves, splashing his yacht in waters and eventually capsizing him and taking his championship, as he won by 27 points in the end, due in no small part due to his aggression in that second half of the season, which he kind of had to have after a kind of messy middle part of the season for Chip Ganassi. And so Dixon won with 4 wins, 6 podiums and 2 poles, and by 27 points from Castroneves with 577 points, playing 550. Having an average start of 9.6, an average finish of 8.2, which was actually worse than Castroneves, who had an average start of 9.2, an average finish of 7.5. But Castroneves only had 1 win and 5 podiums and no poles. And so you can maybe see that Dixon, while he wasn't the most consistent driver throughout the year, in the end he was the fastest driver and he just stole that championship from Castroneves, who really did pay for just setting for top 10s instead of going for top 5s. And if he did have any trouble, he was in trouble, and he had that trouble in Houston, unfortunately. In third was Simon Pagenaud with a couple of wins and 3 podiums, and it was a brilliant year for the Frenchman, who finished 5th in his rookie year in 2012. He finished 3rd last year, so for 2014, could it be number 1? And then you have Will Power in 4th, he was so unlucky, but in the end somehow finished 4th in the championship, 79 points back with 3 wins, 4 podiums and 4 poles, the most poles out of anyone. And so Power definitely had pace, even if the luck wasn't quite there. And maybe he would claim his bridesmaid's mantle in 2014, or even go one better next year, as this is Will Power can now drive on ovals as well as road and street courses. That's just scary for the whole series. And then you had Marco Andretti in 5th, a mature season for Marco. He was fast at places, but not fast everywhere. While he wasn't fast everywhere again this season, he was consistent enough to get finishes everywhere. And so 5th place shows a good amount of maturity, I would say, in 2013. But maybe he would like to get a win in 2014, as he definitely did deserve one in 2013. In the end, he only got 2 podiums and 2 poles. And behind that, he had Justin Wilson for Dale Coyne, a brilliant job from the Englishman, and really did show why he deserves a top drive. How he isn't in a Ganassi or Penske or an Andretti, I'll never know, but then I'm not a marketing man either. And then you had the reigning champion Ryan Hunter-Reay in 7th, who, while got a couple of wins, got the joint most podiums with Dixon with 6 and 3 poles. He didn't have any luck in the second half of the season. As I said, up to round 10, he was right there in the championship hunt. And it just fell apart in the second half of the season as Andretti fell back. His bad luck came highlighted, I think, in Pocono when Sato took him out in the pit lane. So yeah, for Hunter-Reay, it was just an unlucky season for him, because he drove as well as he's ever done, I believe, in 2013. So if he got a bit lucky in 2014, you never know, he might be in the hunt again. Behind him was his teammate James Hinchcliffe, who got 3 wins, 4 podiums and no poles. And he was very inconsistent there, Hinch, with an average finish of 12.3, the worst of any of the top 10 finishers, kind of highlighting that. And so maybe that he's now showing he's got pace to win. He's maybe got pace everywhere and can be kind of consistent. He did have some bad luck in places, but once again for Hinchcliffe, it was an up and down roller coaster year for the mayor of Hinchtown. Behind him was Charlie Kimball, a bit of a surprise in 9th, I would say, for Jip Ganassi, but he's really showing that he's rebuilt his career in America after being in Europe, having a difficult time, and by now he had diabetes, came to America, rebuilt his career in Indy Lights, and now in IndyCar he's showing that he can win races and does belong at the front. He got a win and 2 podiums, and he showed himself that he does belong in that Chip Ganassi car, maybe. And then in 10th was the sad retiree now of the season, Dario Franchitti, who had a very solid year. It just didn't work out for him, and of course it didn't work out for him in the end. He definitely did have pace on occasion, especially in qualifying with 3 poles. He had 4 podiums as well. It just never got together in the race for him, and it is sad that he is now retired. And you know, the end was nigh, I believe, for Franchitti. He'd only had a year or 2 left, maybe in IndyCar at least, and maybe he would have joined his brother in sports car racing. But he was the benchmark for all the other drivers. He was the guy with all the accolades. He had 4 IndyCar titles, 3 Indy 500s, joints most on the grid with Castro Neves, and so he was this benchmark for everyone to aim at, and now he's gone, and now they've got maybe Castro Neves to aim at on the Indy 500 side of things, but on the championship side, maybe it's Scott Dixon now. He's going to have this big bullseye on his head, the guy who everyone is going to look up to and want to beat and want to chase after. He won't be Franchitti anymore. But he did give us some great memories, Franchitti, you know, in 2012 with Sato, and in the years fighting with Power for the championship, and of course his first championship in 2007, which went down to the wire, and somehow he just snatched it in the end before his unfortunately kind of stinted stint, shall I say, in NASCAR in 2008. And just outside the top 10 was Tony Kanaan in 11th, finally getting his Indy 500 win. One of my best moments of 2013, watching the Brazilian finally get that win to go with his 2004 title. Is something that I think everyone in the IndyCar community was happy to see, seeing this guy finally achieve his dream and be on the Borg Warner Trophy alongside his friends, the late Dan Weldon and Dario Franchitti, and Scott Dixon, a bit long though. And so yeah, it's a great up and down year for Kanaan in the end. That victory was the biggest high. He did get 4 podiums, but the setup changes that KV Racing made in the middle of the part of the season, where they were just chasing the setup instead of just settling on what they know, that kind of cost them, you know, some very good races in the middle part of the year on the ovals. And and then on the road and street courses as well that followed. So yeah, it was a very up and down year for KV Racing. It kind of highlights their problem with not being a top team. Now they could be a top team, they kind of just messed it up again in 2013, unfortunately. Then you had Bourdain 12 for Dragon Racing, a brilliant accomplishment in the end, considering they were nowhere for the first half of the year. And in the second half of the year at Toronto, snap, there he is. He's got a couple of podiums, and he showed that he can still race at the front. He showed that in Baltimore again, a bit leery with his fellow countryman Simon Pagenaud on the occasion, but he was still the Bourdain of old. He can run at the front, and maybe with KV Racing in 2014 he showed he could maybe still win races as well in the championship. And go to KV Racing, Simona Di Silvestro, another sad departee of the championship for 2014 as she chased her dreams in F1 with Sauber. But she ended the year very strong with 5 top 10s on the trot, with a podium in Houston, and really did show she had matured as a driver and could fight at the front as well, fighting Scott Dixon in that first race in Houston. And so it's a shame we won't see for 2014 what she could have done in an IndyCar, but of course I think like all of the people in the IndyCar community, I wish her the best in F1 and hope she does achieve her dream of getting on that F1 grid in 2015. And then you had Joseph Newgarden behind her, who showed some maturity, especially in Baltimore as well, fighting through to get second in the end, and got some great top 5 results on the ovals especially as well. He showed some very good pace. So yeah, Newgarden, he was kind of nowhere in his rookie year. When he got near the front, he tended to crash or make a mistake. So at least he's growing and maturing, and it's very difficult being in a single car team as a rookie. I think Di Silvestro can say that with HVM in her early days, but Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing, they're nothing like HVM. HVM were on old equipment and were quite adrift at the back. Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing, they're in it now maybe to win it. You never know in 2014. And then rounding out top 15 was EJV, so another disappointing year for the Venice Raiding. Doesn't look like he's returning for 2014. And he's got pace there, he just doesn't show it a lot. He had no podiums, no wins. He had a pole, of course, a podium pole as well. And he has pace. It's frustrating. It's like watching Sato drive sometimes. It's like watching Sato second half of the season. He has pace, he just doesn't apply it. He makes mistakes. He made mistakes. He showed pace in GP2. I became a fan of him in GP2. He had a terrifying crash as well at Manicora, remember, as well. And then he came to America, and I expected more of Fiso in his IndyCar stint, and he didn't deliver, sadly. But maybe he can deliver in whatever next role he's going to have. And then you had Ed Carpenter just outside the top 15. Ed, always fast on the ovals, one of the few oval specialists still around. And it's great for 2014 that he's just going to concentrate on ovals and of course running his team as well, with Mike Conway driving on the road and street courses. And with double points for the 500 milers now, maybe Ed could be quitting with that decision for 2014. As I believe a very wise one. Even if it doesn't quite work out in 2014, it will work out in 2015, I believe, as the chemistry builds up there. But yeah, I think it's very wise for Ed to get away from being on the road and street courses where he never really showed that pace of being even in the top 10, and just concentrate on the ovals where he is at home, and he is brilliant on the ovals. And then he had Takuma Sato in 17th. Disappointing second half of the year, just fell off a cliff with AJ Foyt. He showed himself again at Houston getting a pole, but unfortunately had trouble with the car in that race. And after a brilliant start at Eden when they went to the 500, where he had his near miss in 2012 trying to pass on Frank Kitty in the last lap and unfortunately crashing out, which kind of sums up Sato's career, I believe, post F3, unfortunately in F1 and IndyCar, where he has pace. He tended to crash a bit, and unfortunately he did that again in 2013, just like he did in 2012, in 2011, in 2010, in 2009. You get the picture, unfortunately. And then we have the two Ray Hall-Epman and Nangan machines. I'm not sure if they're the biggest disappointment of the season either, in 18th and 19th for Rahal and Jakes. I think that's where we expected Jakes, but for Graham Rahal, expected more for him. He did get a podium early in the season, but he didn't show himself enough. And a bit like Marco Andretti of years past, he was fast somewhere, and then other places he was just too anonymous. And it is I find Graham Rahal baffling. He's a guy with pace. He doesn't show it. He doesn't show it most of the time. He just appears when he wants to, it seems. He just needs to collect it all together for a full season, and he hasn't shown that at all in IndyCar, unfortunately. And this is a guy who won his first IndyCar race and his first appearance in the series in 2008 as a teenager, and so we do expect more from him, showing that kind of pace early on, and he hasn't built on it in the years since, unfortunately. And then rounding out the top 20 was Tristan Vautier for Smith Hamilton Peterson Racing, the teammate of Simon Pagenaud though, fellow Frenchman. And yeah, disappointing for Vautier in the end, the rookie. No podiums, no poles, no wins, nothing after a promising start to the year, especially at Barber. And I do find it a bit of a shock though that he is gone for 2014 from that team, has been replaced by Mikhail Elishkin, the 2010 Formula Renault 3.5 champion. And I would have given Vautier another chance, but maybe sponsorship didn't head up, maybe other factors didn't head up as well for him to keep that seat. But yeah, for Vautier, the Indy Lights champion in 2012 as well, just a disappointing end to a very brief IndyCar career, it seems, after that. But I'm sure he'll be back maybe for the 500 as well, and then maybe be back in a full-time seat in future seasons. But for the moment, it was up and down rookie year, mostly down, unfortunately. And then the last of the full-time runners, Sebastian Sabajian, 21st. Of course, no podiums, no wins, and no poles. And he was at Dragon Racing. He had the worst average finish of everyone who did it full-time, 18.3, and the worst average qualifying as well, with 17.7. Joint with Graham Rahal, is that I'm seeing on my stat sheet? Yes, it was. And so yeah, what can we say about Saavedra? He has money, he's Colombian, that's it. That's it you can say. It's surprising seeing him get a top 10, and it's unfortunate at KV Racing alongside fellow Sebastian again, Bourdais. And hopefully he learns things from Bourdais and can maybe show himself to be a bit of a driver in 2014. A bit unlikely though, I will say. So that's a quick roundup of the 2013 season. Hope you have enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I was a bit brief in the race reviews, I do apologise, but it was just a quick look back before we look forward, and we'll have my 2014 preview of the IndyCar Series season in a couple of days, just before St. Petersburg, the race at the weekend. I cannot wait for that though. But as I said, I hope you've enjoyed this, and out for watching. So till next time, cheerio.